This is Mother Ulterior. Welcome to my realm. I want to ask the women listening today a question. Are you a smoker? I was. And the reason that I started was because I wanted to get smokers. Basically, extra breaks at work, which I still don't understand the concept of why smoking means you can nip outside for an extra 5 minutes a few times a day that non-smokers don't get, but that's why I started. And I never stopped to wonder about the history of the cigarette or smoking. It's not something that comes to mind much, whether you're a man or a woman, I'd think, unless you have a rabid thirst for information. Well, I like to learn about things, and the last 2 years I've been doing a lot of learning about things. So now, whether or not you've ever wondered what the history of smoking was, especially for women, I'm going to give you a very brief history of why women smoke. Before the 20th century, smoking was seen as a habit that was an immoral activity and a threat for women. Smoking was socially taboo. Up until the 1920s, women could not light up cigarettes in public. In some cities in America, there were ordinances that actually prohibited smoking by women in public. It was illegal. So it was up until the 1920s that this was the status quo. Now, in 1928, the president of the American Tobacco Company, George Washington Hill, realized that the social taboo on smoking for women meant his company was only marketing to 50% of the population. And when he realized that if they could market cigarettes to women, he said, and I quote, "It will be like opening a gold mine right in our front yard." Now what he was saying is the health of your lungs meant nothing more to him than a gold mine he could plunder and line his pockets with. So George Washington Hill, president of the American Tobacco Company, did what almost every president of any corporation does when they have a product that they need to sell and people need to be convinced that they can buy it. He hired a public relations officer named Edward Bernays. Now, Edward Bernays was an Austrian-American pioneer in the field of propaganda, and he is credited as one of the 100 most influential Americans of the 20th century. One of the most influential people of the 20th century was a master of propaganda. Just really, let that one sink in for a second. Right, so this public relations / propaganda master, he attempts to eliminate the social taboo against women smoking in public on behalf of the cigarette company. The taboo is what stands in the way of women rushing out to buy these cancer sticks. It doesn't matter what advertising or marketing the company might put out. If the product itself is still socially taboo, it is not going to sell to the women. So, Edward Bernays gained advice from a psychoanalyst named A.A. Brill about how he can eliminate the social taboo against women smoking in public. Now, A.A. Brill was an American-Austrian psychiatrist who was the first person to translate Sigmund Freud into English. So there's a little bit of insight into the psychology that A.A. Brill espouses. So Bernays speaks to Brill, and Brill tells Bernays that it is normal for women to smoke because of an oral fixation, or, a fixation on putting things in our mouths. And A.A. Brill said, "Today the emancipation of women has suppressed many of their feminine desires. Cigarettes, which are equated with men, become torches of freedom." Now, I paraphrased a little bit, but yes, torches of freedom. Now, as an up-and-coming public relations officer, I can only imagine how excited Bernays must have been to have a phrase such as torches of freedom now in his arsenal, because it's very catchy, although ultimately meaningless. But this is how a lot of word spells work. So what Bernays does next with this information and this nifty little bumper sticker marketing phrase, torches of freedom, is he pays women that he has specifically chosen to smoke cigarettes in the Easter Sunday Parade. Now, the Easter Sunday Parade was an American cultural event that happened on Easter Sunday, not necessarily religious, but it was seen as, a fashionable little walk that involved the family. So Edward Bernays carefully chose women that he said should be good looking, but also should not look too modelly, and paid them to light up a cigarette and smoke as they walked in this very popular parade. He also hired his own photographers to make sure that there were good pictures taken of his paid models, which were then published around the world. Now, naturally, the women smoking in that parade caused a massive stir. It was a huge shock at the time because women were only permitted to smoke in certain places, such as the privacy of their own homes. And suddenly they were lighting up in the middle of a family Easter Sunday parade. It was almost unheard of. So this campaign starts taking off. It becomes a discussion nationwide and is seen as a protest for equality. Now, the effectiveness of this campaign can be judged by the numbers alone. Now, in 1923, only 5% of cigarette sales were represented by women. And this was when tobacco companies first started to advertise to women. They just weren't buying. Now, these numbers peaked in 1965 at 33.3%. Interesting. And I would imagine have held at least consistent, if not risen or fluctuated ever since. Now, I think this is a very important example of a social taboo being targeted for removal by companies and organizations and corporations who only wanted money. This decision to remove a social taboo for women was not undertaken out of a pure desire to really elevate women or give them some kind of right that they thought men had, but it was done to plunder you like a gold mine. And via their corporate permission, their spokespersons, their models, who made it look glamorous, who did it defiantly, who lit their cigarettes defiantly, their torches of freedom, they couldn't be shamed. The women that were paid to hold the line and puff that cigarette to the end represented the corporate permission to all other women to follow suit. And this is what women, I think, don't really like to hear, is that for all our complications, we are also incredibly simple creatures. The female feedback loop, female peer pressure, is powerful. It works on us. And when we saw, or when our sisters back in the day saw these glamorous, but not too glamorous women smoking in the Easter Sunday parade, they too stepped out of their homes and lit up a cigarette. Now, I imagine they were probably scared at first. It was a brave new world, wasn't it? Going outside to smoke. What will people do? But they did it. They started doing it. The key was in the marketing campaign, masterminded by Edward Bernays and A.A. Brill. Because of these men and that corporation wanting your money, you can now step outside and pull out a cigarette and light it up, your torch of freedom, anytime, anywhere. Does it feel like freedom? It seems that we hear talk about women's rights, the fight for equal rights. Men can smoke and can kill themselves that way. Why can't we? I'm observing that there doesn't seem to be any introspection about whether or not what we're fighting for is good for us. Why do we fight for it? I mean, on a superficial level, I do understand the train of thought that saw it as an equal rights battle. But now that you've heard how women were manipulated by men into smoking just so they could profit from us, does it really still feel as noble as it once did? If we were manipulated into handing over our money so that we could poison ourselves under the guise of female equal rights, what else have we been manipulated into accepting that might not be good for us under the guise of female rights and emancipation? We, as women, needed the corporate and the social permission to break through this social taboo. It was only because we believed the women marching in that Easter Sunday parade were really acting of their own volition, and it was completely organic and spontaneous, believing that these women were really lighting those cigarettes for equal rights. These women, 100 years ago, naively believed their sisters were lighting torches of freedom for emancipation, and not because they'd been paid to by men and corporations, took to the streets and did the same thing. This represents just how easily we women can be manipulated by appeals to our ego, by appeals to the part of us that wants to look glamorous and maybe a little bit dangerous. This appeal to our ego to have the same things men have means that you can now light up your cigarette, your freedom torch, anytime, anywhere, even as every puff harms your health and takes a little bit more time off your life. And every time you try to quit and you can't, you can remind yourself that this represents freedom and emancipation and equal rights. And you can thank your sisters 100 years ago who took that money from the tobacco company, from the propaganda master, to convince your other sisters that emancipation is the freedom to develop a habit that becomes an addiction that enslaves you to that tobacco company. Does it feel like freedom? Or does this make you wonder what else has been sold to you? What else has been sold to women to plunder our gold mines, so to speak, under the guise of emancipation, freedom, and equal rights? This is Mother Ulterior. Have a blessed day.